So I'm here to talk about how to squash production bugs quickly. I work at a company called Bigger Pockets, and this is based on a true story. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. So stop me if this sounds familiar. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm on call. And I get a Slack notification. It's from the support channel. Oh, and another one. Looks like customers cannot receive their password reset emails. That's a bit unusual. Oh, and another one. Oh, okay. Let's look at the logs then. It's not very good, is it? What about the code? Let's check the code. That seems fine, and that doesn't really help me. Meanwhile, the CTO is getting a bit anxious. And customers are complaining, they're taking to Twitter, they're locked out, and they can't get into their accounts. Fine. So I drop everything that I'm doing, and I pair with a colleague, and these mailer jobs are getting sent in a background queue. So let's add some error logging. So we add the error logging, we spend 20 minutes trying to figure out where to put it, and whilst we're doing that, that's a bit odd. It resets itself, everything's fine again. Okay, well, I mean, we'll just fix it later, right? We'll put it on the backlog. 1 second, that's not the backlog, yeah. No, that's not the backlog either, this is the backlog. We'll put it on the backlog, done, and that's definitely going to get done, right? Because we all know what happens to things on the backlog. But it was a one-off issue, okay? No problem. We'll just, wait a minute, 2 months later, yep, it's back again, Groundhog Day, same problem, reset emails. The support team are getting kind of overwhelmed, but we added the logging. Cool, so it's fine, we'll just search in the logs, oh dear, still no error. So we'll look at the Sidekick admin dashboard, right? That'll help us somehow, I don't know. And so we got into this vicious cycle, we would add more logging, and we ended up just banging our heads against a brick wall. We would look at the bug, an hour, it would kind of fix itself, we add more logging, it goes to the backlog, and customers were getting annoyed and it was a bit embarrassing. So I started to think maybe this is just us, maybe we're the only company who has this problem. So I asked 50 engineers. I put out a survey asking them this question: how often do you encounter issues where you lack visibility into your application's performance or errors? And the result kind of shocked me. Now, this is only 50 people. This is not people who use Rails even. This is just across all languages. 50% of people say they experience this every month. And a third of people say they experience it every week. Okay, so maybe we're not on our own. So next I want to talk a bit about feelings. How does it feel when you're in this situation? Well, for me, first reaction is I'm annoyed. This should be easy. Isn't Ruby supposed to be this joyful language? This doesn't feel very joyful. We're in 2024 and I can't figure out what's going wrong in a production incident. This is not great. And then I feel a bit sad. I kind of get a bit bored and I'm just kind of going through the logs, kind of looking at the error tracking, looking at stack trace, still can't figure it out. And then the time moves on and pressure starts to kick in. This is an urgent issue. It needs to be resolved. And then I start to think, hang on, maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm just a rubbish engineer. And hang on, I've been doing this for more than 10 years. I've got to go to my manager and say, oh, sorry, I can't figure this out. It's not great. So if you've ever felt like this, I've got some good news for you. The problem is not you, and you're not alone. And in order to combat this, I came up with this 5-step process. And here it is. The first thing is, what is the question you want to ask? You decide what data would help you answer that question. You build some instrumentation and deploy it. You use the graphs or the logs, and finally you improve. And it's a little cycle. You can just keep going round and round this cycle. And if you turn it on its side, it's kind of got some nice little steps. So I call this the steps to observable software, or SOS for short. So the first thing we're going to do is, what question do we want answered in this case I've taken here? Why are password reset emails not being sent? Now that's a pretty generic question, it's pretty vague, so we need to come up with some hypotheses. Why might they not being sent? Well, here are some 3 reasons just off the top of my head. Maybe they're failing, maybe they're timing out, or maybe they're being delayed. Well, they're probably not failing because we don't see any errors in our error tracking software. Same thing for timing out. So my guess is that somehow they're being delayed. So what might this look like? So here's the theory. Maybe this is what a healthy queue looks like. The green boxes are the mailer jobs, and the grey boxes are other jobs. So it's nice and healthy, they're interspersed, so it won't be long until somebody gets a mail sent to them. And then this might be, maybe what's going on, that there's lots of other jobs being created, and that's pushing password reset emails off the end of the time horizon, if you like. And I've actually experienced this. I recently booked a flight with an airline who I shall not name, and the exact same problem happened. I signed up for the account, I gave them my email address, and they said, you'll get an activation email shortly. I waited 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, I went to bed, I got up the next morning, and there it was in my inbox after 4 hours. And it timed out after 10 minutes. So that was really useful, wasn't it? Anyway, so this might be what's happening. So how can we ask a more specific question around that? Well, which jobs are taking time in that same queue? Okay, I think we can answer that through some logging and through some graphs. So let's first of all decide which data to collect. And when I'm doing this, I tend to look at these 4 different dimensions. Which is the event that we want? We want to look at jobs that have been performed, right? I think of logs as events. They're tiny little events. It's just saying this happened. Second of all, we want to filter by the job queue. We want to group by the job class, and we want to look at the duration of that. Okay, seems pretty reasonable. So how do we build that? So I want to take you through right from having no structured logging and really no observability at all, through how I've done that. So here are the 4 main areas. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about which data type to use. There's a lot of misinformation about these out there. Should we use plain text or structured? I'm pretty sure you can guess the answer because it clues in the title of the presentation. And finally, I want to talk about which logging library to use and how to customize it. So here are the 3 data types. These are not pillars. If anybody says these are the 3 pillars of observability, close the browser tab and go and look at somebody else. These are not pillars. They're 3 data types. Traces are the best, and metrics are the worst. And logs are okay. We're going to start out with logs purely because everybody in this room probably knows what logging is, and it's also being improved in Rails 8. So let's be a bit pragmatic here. Second of all, should we have plain or structured? We're going to use structured logs, and let me explain why. So here's what a plain text log looks like in code. I'm sure you've seen this, logger.info string, with a little bit of data interpolated in the string. Okay, so if we used it in our observability tool, whether that's New Relic, Datadog, AppSignal, any one of these, here's what it might look like a little bit. So let's say we want to search for mailer jobs. We'd have to use a regular expression, okay? Fuzzy find. Cool, so how do I now see any job that's taken more than 1 second? Ah, that's right, I can't, it's impossible. Here's what a structured log, on the other hand, looks like. You've got a logger, and you've got a structured thing, which is, in this case, a hash. So it's a bit like just having a database. Imagine if you only stored strings in a database. Some people do it. It's not such a great idea. You couldn't filter, search, query by anything. So this gives you all these different attributes. Here's what it now looks like in our UI. We can make columns with these attributes in, and then we can filter on these attributes. Here's how we can filter by it. And this is great. This is what we want. Nice. So the next thing is which logging library. There are many ones in Ruby. Here are some of my criteria to choose. It's got to be able to do structured logging, obviously. It's got to integrate with Rails, great documentation. That's a bit of a personal standard of mine. And then it's got to be relatively mature. Now, obviously, we all know that we're incredibly grateful to all these authors for making open source gems. That being, when you compare them all, Semantic Logger, for me, is the best option here. So we're going to take that, we're going to install the Rails bindings for Semantic Logger. We're going to format those logs as JSON. And when we do those two things, we get some automatic logging of Rails out-of-the-box things by default. It's not brilliant, it's just some absolute basics. So here are the libraries that it logs by default. And of these, we really care about the active job logging. And here's what it looks like in our logs. This is kind of a JSON object, so you can see the attributes that it outputs. Here's the event name. Here's the job class and queue. And finally, here's the duration. So it's all good. We can move on with our lives. We can just install it and we're all good to go, right? Well, not quite, because this approach has many different weaknesses. First one is there's no conventions. There's some missing attributes and API requests are not logged and lots more besides, but I just want to focus on those three. So we're all here partly because Rails is convention over configuration. That was its big selling point. It's delivered on that, except I would argue for logs, which is a little bit kind of left in the weeds. So any of these attribute names is fine, right? We can have a hash structured however we want. Let's use job class. No, I like job.class. No, I want message.class. And so we end up with a mess, and we all know where that kind of leads us. So enter OpenTelemetry. We can use this amazing Cloud Native Foundation project. Now, there is an OTel library for Ruby, but it's just not ready for production use yet. It's not that mature. Instead, we can look at the semantic conventions for OpenTelemetry, which is on their website. Here is an example of the name of the queue. It's maybe not that semantic messaging.destination.name. We can maybe alias that in our observability tools to something a little bit more friendly. So just as a reminder, here's what Semantic Logger gives you out of the box, and here's what it would look like with these semantic standards from OpenTelemetry. So let's change the code to help us do that. So first of all, we're going to find the log subscriber within Semantic Logger. That's a little bit hacky. We're going to copy and paste that into our code. And then we're going to change the payload event of the event formatter class in that job subscriber. So you can see here, don't worry about the details, but I've restructured the hash to rename the attributes. And then finally, we swap it out in an initializer. And this is what we get. Okay, pretty good. So let's talk about missing attributes. Here are the absolute basics, I would argue, to be able to instrument and observe a Rails app. And none of these are given to us out of the box. So I'm just going to show you how to do two of these, headers and user agent. So we can do this by adding into application.yaml.rb log tags. And there are two ways of doing this. You can do it through a Lambda, or you can do it through kind of a plain hash approach. The plain hash approach will take the request and call this method on it and rename it, basically tag it with those logs. And here's what we get. We can see the extra attributes down here. Fantastic. So then the final thing is we need to talk about missing API requests. So any API request, very often they have these kind of plain text loggers which will spew all of this nonsense to your instrumentation tool, which is useless. So let's assume we're using Faraday, which as we all know is the best HTTP client, yeah, nod along. And so we define some middleware in Faraday. We're going to register that middleware and then use it. And so now we get structured logs for our API requests. And here's what it looks like. Cool. So the next thing we need to do is send it to our observability tool. So the nice thing about Semantic Logger is it has appenders. So you can send your logs to single or multiple sources. And because AppSignal is a very generous sponsor of this conference, I've given an example of app signal right here. You can tell this is all the code to make it work. It's pretty simple, it's pretty clean. And here's what it might look like in the app signal interface. You've got all your attributes on the left and the values on the right. Wow, so okay, that was a lot. If you want any more information, you can go to this QR code. I'll be showing the same QR code at the end of the presentation. This has all the slides on and a few goodies for you. So the next bit is a bit where I get really excited. We've built this instrumentation, we've deployed it, now we need to look at the graphs. And it's graphs where this stuff really starts to get interesting. So as a reminder, here are our 4 dimensions. And we've now outputted all of this to logs. So let's set the time range, and we want to see all the logs inside the queue. Okay, cool. We filter by the queue. Next, we want the jobs performed. So now we've added that filter in, you can see the logs have shrunk down. Next thing we want to do, group by duration of job class. And we get this nice little graph. Pretty cool. The final thing we need to do is improve. So I'm quite a critical person, I'm quite a perfectionist, so I like to look at what I've done and just rip it to shreds in my own brain. So it might well be we've sent the wrong attributes by accident. It might be something's gone wrong with the deploy, or it might just be we look at the graph and say, well, this is kind of okay, but it's not really what I wanted. And so this is your opportunity to iterate, to improve it, to deploy it again. So we're just moving these very small increments. Instead of having this 3-month project to say, log everything, we're just going to go in little chunks here. And then we're going to show our colleagues. And my experience of this is once you start to show your colleagues what's possible, they'll say things like, I don't really care about all of this logging stuff, John, but what I do care about is something else. And then you can work with them to add what they care about. And then your colleagues start to get interested in this. And this is how we've created a culture of observability within BiggerPockets. You can learn what they want, what the business needs. And so next, just some examples, we could add job latency or maybe request ID or maybe IP. Now we've been around this cycle many times at BiggerPockets, and I want to show you a snapshot of what our experience now looks like with the previous error. So I'm still on call, but this time it's Friday morning, not afternoon. And I get a little notification. This isn't from a support channel or an annoyed customer or my boss. It's from a monitor within the observability tool. And it's saying, hang on, the latency of this queue is rising. You might want to do something about this. So we click a link in that Slack message, and this is what we see. That's a bit strange. What's that blue line? It's within the 5 minutes queue. Oh, wow, it's up to 15 minutes duration now. It should be completing within 5. It's breached its SLI. That's not good. So let's ask a question. Which jobs are taking the most time? Okay, so that's something we can answer now. Let's look for the jobs performed, basically in that same queue, group by job class, sum the duration, and this is what we get. We can see this massive blue bar rising. I wonder what that is. We hover over. Interesting. It's the analytics update user visits job. That's our answer. We're now maybe 60 seconds into the incident. Interesting. I wonder what's enqueuing those jobs. Let's search for jobs enqueued in that same queue, and let's group by HTTP resource. Now this is something I added into the logs. This is a combination of the controller and the action. Let's group by all logs, and here we go. The green bar is obviously the problem here, and that is, profile show. We're 2 minutes in. We now know the problem is something to do with profile show. Cool. Now we have this whole world of other questions we can ask. Okay, I wonder what IP is hitting that action. It's an interesting question. We're going to filter by request handled. This is another event I added in. That's just basically you can do it using the log tags technique I showed you earlier. And we're going to look at anything that hit the profile show controller. We're going to group by IP. That's kind of interesting. That's the IP address. Why is that IP address hitting us so many times? Probably because it's scraping us. So let's just recap what we've learned. There's a scraper at the IP address. It hits profile show. That enqueues a whole load of analytics jobs, and that delays password reset emails. Not a fictional example, a real example from a real production code base. Cool. So what's the fix? It's pretty obvious. We go into our infrastructure, we use Cloudflare, and we block the IP. And the really cool thing is we can now look at the graph. Oh, okay, it's coming down. All sorted. 5 minutes in, and we're all done. How does this feel? It feels joyful. I'm happy. I've spent 5 minutes. I can still retain the context of what I was working on before. No customers are being impacted. My boss is happy. And we've recovered the website. This is kind of a bit of a superpower. I can feel like I can tackle really anything my Rails app throws at me. And it also becomes addictive. The thing I didn't expect when I started this journey 2 years ago was the moment you start asking questions, you start to get curious about completely unrelated things in the app. Recently, I was in a dashboard and I saw a flood of 404s. That's a bit strange. And that's kind of like a quarter of all our traffic is 404s. Clicked down and realized, somebody's going through all our profiles pages with just starting with AAAAA, AAAB as usernames. And we're getting all this flood of 404s. We did the same thing, blocked them, and all of a sudden, our response times are 19% faster, just by accident. Another Tuesday at the office. And so here are the results that we've got over 18 months. Our downtime is reduced by 98%. Our 500 errors are reduced by 83%. We still have hundreds of them, so we're not there yet. And most of all, we can fix bugs 20 times faster. So I've got some resources for you. There is a playbook here. You can subscribe to my newsletter, all free, of course. There's a cheap sidekick course there. I'm also running an 6-week hands-on workshop in October. It's 60% off until 9 p.m. tonight. There's 2 plans there, and the code is Euruko. And thank you for your time and attention.